do you not see a strategic value in RFK Jr., let's say, being able to be in the mix right now in this primary conversation versus Cornel West, who is not going to really be in the mix in certain ways until a year from now?
Well, I suspect, I mean, that's a good question. And it really, really remains to be seen. I think that with Cornell entering into this race, I think it's going to have an impact not only on RFK, but also on Joe Biden.
How
And
so?
I said that because they're going to be surprised, I think, by the enthusiasm that's being generated by not just Cornell himself as a personality, but the issues and the way he is framing these issues. I think they're going to resonate. Hey, look, what we're going to see is the kind of enthusiasm that was generated in the initial phases of the Sanders campaign. When you
Mm-hmm.
talk about when you talk about the contradictions of these super millionaires and billionaires who are taking advantage of all of the suffering in the population, all of the economic contradictions, the obscene levels of profits that the petroleum companies are making in the military industrial complex. Um, people it is resonating because people are living. I mean, you have over 140 million people who are basically living from paycheck to paycheck. And these folks, they don't understand the impact that that is having and the possibility that has in terms of real radical politics. So, you know, uh, it's going to have an impact on RFK. He's going to have to begin to articulate even more populist things, if you will, and eventually Joe Biden. So I think that you're going to see a gradual shift somewhat to the left as a consequence of this West campaign.
But going back to this point, I think that's perfectly possible. I think that's probably likely because RFK Jr. to his credit has demonstrated some willingness to be flexible on some of these issues, especially ones that are just not as familiar to him. Okay, fine. But there's this, especially now that Cornel West is in the race, the question about the strategic choice to run as a Democrat versus run as an independent. Run as a Democrat who also is open to a dirty break, and then run as an independent versus someone who runs as an independent from the beginning. We're now out of the realm of just like chit chatting about it, and in the realm of, well, it's happening, and we get to see these two different tracks and how they manifest. And it does strike me that every time there's a new poll out, we get another media cycle. We cover it on Rising. Oh, RFK Jr. is polling at 20% in the Democratic primary. Cornel West is not going to be included in some of those polls. Marianne Williamson, who's actually in the primary, isn't included in a bunch of those polls for reasons. So, there's not going to be a debate, right? The DNC has said there's no debates, but there is a force the debate movement that is talking about how unfair it is that RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson don't get to debate Biden. Cornel West's name is not going to be in that conversation because as a not Democrat, it was never for him, right? So I don't know. I want you to, can you talk to me a little bit about what you think strategically is valuable about Cornel West running as a Green Party candidate? And then we'll circle back to some of the internal issues of how he's going to secure the nomination and what's going on with the Green Party. But yeah, you brought up this kind of this idea that it's just impossible. Many people have said this, and I'm interested in this. It's impossible running as a Democrat to really speak to the issues compellingly, to really be as adversarial as you need to be to the systems that are a problem, et cetera. I see that argument as being within the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party itself is an obstacle to you. But that is the case whether or not you're technically running on the ticket or whether you're running as an independent, right? So what do you see as like the strategic value or the moral value or the messaging value of running as an independent as opposed to an independent like Bernie who's on the Democratic ticket?
Well, one thing that happens, well, two things. First, it's reflective of the reality of politics in the U.S., where the largest block of voters are independents.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, if one runs outside of the Democrat Party and you are taking up positions that are not really being articulated that clearly within the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, you can avoid the charge of being a sheepdogger, if you will, for the Democrats, and that's very important for those elements on the left that have been betrayed over and over again by these so-called progressives. The fact that the second campaign of Bernie Sanders was a campaign in which many people felt like he gave up too soon because, in my opinion, I don't think he was serious about really doing what needed to be done in order to win the nomination. In order to win the nomination, he was going to have to split that party. He was not prepared to do that. People forget that the issue with Bernie Sanders wasn't that he couldn't win. It was because he could win.
And when you say split that party, what do you mean by that? What does that look like?
Well, what it looked like is basically that they would have had to keep on running and winning to the extent possible, and without compromising.
To split the vote. So
split the vote,
split the vote, spoil the election.
No. First, take the nomination. Take the Democratic Party nomination. In order to take the Democratic Party nomination, they had to continue to fight. This notion that everything was won when they say it was won just didn't seem to add up necessarily, including the possibility of a challenge at the convention. But because of their commitment to party unity and this line about the dangers of Trump, they weren't prepared to go that far.
And COVID, I think Bernie, I'm not justifying it, but I think the narrative was that he had concerns about, remember the narrative was, you're making people go to polls and vote in the middle of a pandemic, even though you know you're going to lose, you're endangering lives. And my understanding is that argument had an effect on Bernie and he felt pressure to not drag it out. I don't agree with it. And obviously what we know about COVID now makes you feel differently about it. But my understanding is that was part of it.
And I can't comment on that. It could have been an impact, but it wasn't stopping many people from going to the polls. It didn't stop the Democrats from making sure that there was no choice for a Green Party candidate in certain states when they went to court to kick the Howie Hawkins campaign off the ballots. It didn't have a great impact, it seemed, on the Republicans. So, if that's the excuse then that they use, and so be it. But it was clear to me that they weren't prepared to go all the way to win that nomination. My point is this: there are segments of the U.S. population that are prepared to go all the way. They understand that this two-party monopoly is rotten, it's anti-democratic, and they're not going to be railroaded once again by this fear-mongering of Donald Trump into just blindly giving up their votes to the lesser of two evils. That lesser of two evil appeal is really losing its steam. So, this is the new moment. And so a Cornel West, for example, if this is going to be a serious campaign, he picks up on where Bernie left off. He talks about in clearer ways radical alternatives. He embraces not only Medicare for all, but perhaps maybe you go further and talk about nationalizing all aspects of the medical delivery system in this country. Yeah, let's talk about breaking up the banks, but not just breaking up the banks. Maybe we should take the banks back, make these banks, nationalize these banks. Let's have some real discussions. If the energy companies seem to be unprepared to deal with climate change in a serious way, then what's the justification for them to remain in private hands? Okay. If you are talking about a socialist transition, let's talk about what that might mean. What are some of the democratic structures that should be built beyond the electoral process that we should be looking at in a serious way that goes beyond the elections? Let's talk about what a radical movement for socialist transformation might look like in this country. And don't tell me that people aren't prepared for it, aren't ready for it. They may be scared of it, but we saw that when that term was introduced into the public discourse, look what happens. 60% of the young folks are like, hey, what is this thing called socialism? And we might support it. Okay. So if you're looking further down the road, and you looking at the possibilities that this system provides for us in terms of real change, then you would have your strategic objectives such where you focus on that young demographic, you focus on the working class that's fed up. You understand what is the appeal for the radical right. They are being galvanized against this elite in Washington. The issue they have is that the line that they are embracing, though, is a neo-fascist line. But the idea of them being of this elite that has no concern about them is what is resonating. That's why you have the phenomenon of Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, I want to move on more squarely to Cornel West in just a second, but I'm mooting this. I hope it doesn't come across like I'm making an ideological argument. I'm just really curious about this because there is a narrative. There's just like it's treated like an aphorism that you just can't run within the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party won't be fair to you, which is obviously true. But it seems like the Democratic Party is also not fair to third parties. They try to kick them off the ballot. All the things that you described. They talk about spoilers nonstop, but they don't support ranked choice voting. All the things that you described. But also we have the example of Bernie, who I think did want to play ball in the ways that you described, and was not willing to say things like, I'm running on the Democratic Party ticket, but I am an independent, and it's because the Democratic Party sucks. It needs to be
transformed.
Yeah. It is corrupt. Not these colleagues are my friends and I've worked with them, but I have had a front seat to corruption in Washington for the last 30 years. I won't stand idly by anymore. The reason that you don't have Medicare for all right now is because this person and Clyburn and all of them, and they're taking the money. And I'm going to run that kind of a campaign, even though technically I'm a Democratic candidate, saying I'm only a Democratic candidate because the system is so rigged. It's the only way I get a platform. And I will not tell any of you at any point to vote for the Democratic nominee because they're the Democratic nominee. You should vote your conscience. And I hope that I'm that person. There's a version of that happens. And so I guess my question is it really about the technical fact of running on the Democratic ticket? Or is it about the failure of candidates to have an independent message, perhaps because they feel compelled because they're on the ticket or whatever? But do you think it's possible to have the kind of adversarial, insurgent, revolutionary narrative and rhetoric and still technically be on the Democratic Party ticket? Is it really about the ticket itself?
You're raising a very serious question, and I think I haven't been that clear. This might get me in trouble with some of my friends. I've always felt that insurgency within that party was possible. My position was that it was possible under a Bernie Sanders, as you just began to allude to again. But they weren't prepared to, in fact, do it. So it wasn't just being inside the Democratic Party. You don't, just because you run under the Democratic Party line doesn't mean that there's some kind of magical transformation. You become a centrist. No. If you have a political line that's progressive, even revolutionary, if you are able to organize in that party and push that line and you're prepared to go all the way, it can be done. People don't realize how fragile that party really is. This notion that, is completely controlled by the neoliberal elites, that's true. But the fact of the matter is there are real fractures in that party. There's real spaces that can be exploited within that party. But the issue is you haven't had people with any real creativity that have been able to take advantage of that. And you have this issue of fashioning an ideological position. But you start off saying you hope you're not taking the ideological line. Well, what's wrong with that? Because
people on the internet are very like, oh, you want to suckle at the teat of the Democratic Party, Brianna? Like you're arguing against Dr. Cornel West. Why are you being such a shill for sheep herding? Blah, blah. Like, so I'm just trying to preempt that. Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to find out what the best options are. I'm not taking a position. I'm just trying to moot all of the options. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. This struggle, this ideological struggle has to be front and center. And my position has always been that the people who find themselves on the so-called left They cannot be. They have to push it. They have to push their ideals, the values, without apology, with boldness, because we believe, and I think that it's true, that we are on the right side of history. And I know that sounds like a cliche and all that. So I don't care. The issue is that basically the realities that people are facing today are such that if we don't have a radical alternative, that basically we might as well just call it a day. Okay, we're not going to be able to deal with the contradictions of climate change. We're not going to be able to deal with this militarism that in Ukraine, for example, is putting us in a position of possible nuclear confrontation. We're not going to be able to galvanize opposition to the insanity of U.S. Chinese policies. You know, if we don't have a sophisticated populace in the U.S. prepared to engage in oppositional politics, then basically we can call it a day. There has to be an explanation why you have people in France and other countries going to the streets en masse protesting against neoliberal policies, and we have all this suffering in the U.S. and this relative quietude. Nobody's doing anything, you know. And so part of it is the ruling class's ability to basically to galvanize a certain kind of passivity among the population. And then when we started getting agitated to direct us to the theatrics of a Donald Trump, while the neoliberals tighten up the control of the state and the range of information and speech that's acceptable to the oligarchy, and we don't call that fascism, you know? So we have to have a radical break. We have to have a conversation around what politics look like, what radical democracy looks like, and be prepared to struggle for it, and not get trapped into this every 2 years, every 4 year kind of cycle. Let Donald Trump come back again in 2024. I believe in the people. I believe we're going to survive another Donald Trump. Okay, I'm more concerned about surviving another Biden administration. Because for me, the cutting edge of neo-fascism in the U.S. isn't just the so-called Trumpites. It is the neoliberal ruling class that has completely captured the state. They are the cutting edge of a particular kind of fascism in this country, the neoliberal Democrats.
It's hard to argue with that, and I'm glad I'm not in an ideological position where I want to. Although, people are gonna. I mean, I was feeling a little trollish, I guess, or something last night. And I simply tweeted, you don't have to vote for Joe Biden. Now, that's obviously true. We live in a democracy, more or less. People know that there's going to be multiple names on the ballot, and they also know that they can choose to not vote at all. But saying something like that is so disruptive to the liberal worldview, because of the kind of moral investment they have in voting for someone even like Biden, a man who still has kids dying at the border, a man who crushed one of the most promising strike moments in contemporary American history, a man who betrayed his promises from the $2,000 checks to the student debt cancellation, who rigged his signature infrastructure bill by bifurcating it, guaranteeing that all of the good stuff was going to be compromised and left by the wayside, a man who has completely failed to live up to the challenges that the climate crisis presents, a man who has multiple accounts of accusations of sexual assault, harassment, et cetera, against him that have never been really contended with. After Kamala Harris said she believed the women, she became vice president and said it was a debate or whatever. A man who eulogized Strom Thurmond and who supported and who argued against segregated integrated busing integration, all of those things. It's a moral cause, despite all of that, to vote for for Joe Biden, because it's not actually about Joe Biden, it's about Donald Trump. And if it's not this Donald Trump, it'll be the next Donald Trump. DeSantis, I think, is legitimately kind of worse than Donald Trump, and they will keep getting worse because that's the nature of the ratchet effect. Okay, enter the good doctor, Cornel West. We all know that the thing that he's now running against mostly is going to be this accusation of being a spoiler.
Yes.
As a Green Party member and candidate yourself, I wonder if you have any thoughts about how to preempt that, how to contend with those arguments, how to open up people's kind of hearts and minds and willingness to understand what this project is and why it is worth the risk to have another Donald Trump.
Right. Well, I think his campaign has a challenge. The way we dealt with this in 2016 was we talked about the need for building a movement beyond the election, that we reminded people that the struggle for democracy and for human rights in the U.S. Is a protracted one, and that the only way we win this struggle is through building effective organization, effective opposition, be it the Green Party and other formations. But that has to be one of the lines, the second line, in terms of the electoral process. That is not just about the politics on the national level. It's about building a movement and building a politics and engaging in the politics at every level of the state. That the Democrats have still not reversed the more than 900 representatives at the state level that was lost under Barack Obama. That you have these various states that are controlled by the Republicans that are pushing some of the most backward legislation that one can imagine. So it's about the state level. It's about the local level. Okay, it's about democracy, and it's about also building dual power. So we say that we have to have radical change in the U.S. The question we have to then deal with is how do we arrive at that?
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.